Yes, welcome back once again to another episode of the Contrarians. This is one of our regular shows where one of the team has a very contrarian, a contrarian, but in this case, very contrarian choice, I think, for favorite album by a band. In this case, we're going to be talking about Bad Company, and I've got Tim Derling here to help me out on this. So essentially, Bad Company, a little bit of a brief history. So this was actually the first band to put out a full-length album on Led Zeppelin's new vanity label, whatever you want to call it, Swan Song Records. They were basically the biggest band, the only other hit band to have records on Swan Song where, most of the other acts didn't really do very well. We had Pretty Things and Maggie Bell and Detective, and there was a Dave Edmunds, I think. But it was basically Led Zeppelin and Bad Company. Bad Company was a big hit. Obviously, Led Zeppelin was a big hit as well. So this is a band that, and actually I did a History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff episode on Swan Song. So you can hear a little bit of the history of that there. So this is a band that is a bit of a super group, or quite a bit of a super group. We had Mick Ralphs coming out of Mott the Hoople. We had Simon Kirke and Paul Rodgers coming out of Free. And we had Boz Burrell, who was a bit of a journeyman. One of his most famous things he did, I guess, is King Crimson. We sadly lost Boz September 21st, 2006, quite a while ago now, at the age of 60. So that was sort of the classic lineup that made all those big, great 70s albums. But yeah, an absolutely huge band. You had the debut in 74, 5 times platinum, straight shooter, 3 times platinum, Run with the Pack platinum. You can see a trend happening here. Burning Sky went gold. Desolation Angels in 79, double platinum. Rough Diamond, not certified. You get into the Brian Howe era. I'm going to leave that, and Tim will talk a little bit about that era. And then you ended up with A Company of Strangers in 95. Robert Hart, sounding a lot like Paul Rodgers, definitely on that record. So yeah, there's your debut. There's a copy there on CD signed by Mick. Here's just a couple of assorted, various live things that they did. This was kind of interesting. I've got one of these. The box is all exploded, but I've got one of these Superstar concert series on Bad Company, where you've got the tip sheet. Tim knows all about this stuff, Mr. Radio. Yes.
there. Q sheet, yeah.
Q sheet, yes.
Make it sound like you're introducing them.
A couple of the albums, yeah. There's 3 records. This is actually from 1991. This thing, and we've got my Run with the Pack from the the silver. We got Simon signed there. We got Paul signed in the inside. And I even framed up. I did a Ye Olde Metal 1979 book, which is actually still available. But I wrote up the whole story of this album, which is kind of one of my favorites from the catalog. Desolation Angels. I know Pete at Sea of Tranquility, buddy of ours, is not so fond on that record. I quite like it. So anyways, that's kind of your history of Bad Company, a really big band. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention, this is a band that are almost comically considered the very heart of classic rock, with their simple bluesy sound, very simple drumming out of Simon Kirke, big celebrated, considered sometimes the greatest singer of all time, Paul Rodgers, right? And they're very, very celebrated for the likes of their big songs rather than the big albums. Almost stealth-like seeing these multi-platinums out of these guys, but Bad Company, Can't Get Enough, Feel Like Making Love, Shooting Star, Good Love and Gone Bad. You just say the titles, most people of a certain vintage, I suppose, know these songs. Ready for Love, Burning Sky, Rock and Roll Fantasy. They had a little bit of I think Desolation Angels was kind of like they were on the radar again. They had kind of gone away and kind of come back up for that record. So that's your Bad Company. Big bluesy band, Swan Song Records, Paul Rodgers' main vehicle throughout his life. Obviously, there were a few other things, The Firm and a lot of solo stuff. And they came from Free, and Free, of course, is almost like a rudimentary demo version of Bad Company. But then, so there is this big 70s band. So Tim is going to talk to us about his very contrarian choice for favorite Bad Company album. I'll let him tell you what it is. But first, I just wanted to check, how is the awesome 8-track book coming?
Thanks, Martin. Right now, what's going on with Unschooled is we're still checking proofs.
Okay.
You get the proof sent, not bound together, but just loose pages, just to make sure that the red, say if there's a red on the page, it's not oversaturated to the point where it eats up all the white printing and you can't see it. Or we just want it to look as perfect as we can. Ooh, so we're very much in the process of that. And in honor of that, in honor of the Unschooled, I brought a couple of Bad Company 8 tracks.
All right.
Burning Sky and Desolation Angels. And I got the vinyl out because I find the vinyl very, very interesting. I'll just go through them quick because you already went through the history. Mm-hmm. I was a long time before I realized that the letters in the Bad Company on here are actually sort of like not marble, but there's markings in there almost as I thought it was completely white, but it's not. There's a lot more going on. And actually, something I just recently found was this quite an old cassette version of the first album. Obviously, the first album they were one of these bands that they didn't exactly not pay their dues, but they were big right off the bat. Straight shooter, pretty self-explanatory. And you mentioned Pete on Sea of Tranquility. You guys talked about this album cover, and this is one of those ones where the longer you look at it, you go, wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah. Then you had Burning Sky, which is like, I think we're into the Hypnosis years now. This is when Paul Rogers started dressing like a samurai. And no text other than just the label information. Mm-hmm. And this one is interesting because what you have here on Desolation Angels is very similar to what's on the Presence album. In other words, these white spaces, there's nothing there. It's an absence. And they continue that whole theme throughout here. And you're right, that album was a comeback. I mean, when you go from triple platinum down to gold in 3 or 4 years, it's perceived as being, a fall off, but they went back to platinum with that. And then this album, which didn't certify at all, Rough Diamonds, which is one of those albums, anyone that has this, it's almost impossible to keep this in really good shape because these points want to, but other than that, it's kind of cool. It's it's a die cut cover. They sort of break up. They were also managed by Peter Grant, as you said, and the death of John Bonham kind of put Peter Grant into a depression, but they got one more album out, 1982, Rough Diamonds, didn't certify, not a very good album, and that was kind of it. Paul Rogers started releasing solo albums, the highest profile thing, and honestly, at my age, when Paul Rogers and Jimmy Page came onto my radar is when I heard the song Radioactive on Top 40 Radio. So they did The Firm, 2 albums in 85 and 86. And the funny thing is I don't own the Firm albums anymore. I used to, but man, with the star power in that band, they should have been so much better. And they just weren't. But anyway, so while that was happening, Atlantic puts out this compilation, which is probably still the highest selling Bad Company compilation. Dumb title, 10 from 6. And the reason it's a dumb title, it's implying 10 songs from 6 albums, but there's nothing from Burning Sky. That never made any sense to me. So they've even got little tiny slivers of artwork from the first 6 albums, but there's nothing from Burning Sky. Like they could have easily taken off Live for the Music and put the song Burning Sky on the end there. But anyway, that's just one of those oversights that I don't understand. So while that was going on, Paul Rogers doing The Firm, Mick Ralphs, Simon Kirke, and I think on the first album anyway, Boz Burrell was still involved. They recruit vocalist Brian Howe, who had most recently sang for Ted Nugent, was on the Penetrator album. And they put out this album, Fame and Fortune, 1986, just comes and goes without any incident at all. They follow it up 1988 with Dangerous Age. My copy here has an HMV price sticker on it, which is kind of cool. And that album actually goes gold for them. They follow it up with Holy Water, 1990. This goes platinum. So they're on a bit of a comeback now. And even in the midst of grunge, Bad Company could be seen as the most anachronistic band. They score a gold album with Here Comes Trouble. And then there's a live album, which I actually quite like. It's called What You Hear Is What You Get. And this is a good mix of the 2 eras of Bad Company. And you get to hear Brian Howe singing the Paul Rogers songs, which he does fine, because the Paul Rogers songs, I read an interview with him, was he looked at those as warm-ups because he's got a naturally high voice. So to sing the Paul Rogers songs, they're just in a lower key. So it was there's no problem for him to deliver those songs. And as you said, they had one more, to this date, the last studio album to come out. This is Company of Strangers in 95 with a singer named Robert Hart, which I'm not familiar with. I don't know where he came from. This didn't do anything. Then they put out this kind of, in my opinion, crappy Unplugged album, Stories Told and Untold, same lineup. And that was it for new music. 1999, they put the original Bad Company anthology out, which is a 2-disc set, and still came in the big what they call fat boy CD cases. So 4 new songs on here. They weren't bad songs. And the only other thing I've got from them is this. This came out about 5 years ago. Brian Howe put this out. It's this live 1977 and 79. So disc 1 is live concert from Houston in 77, and disc 2 is from Wembley in March of 79. So with all of that said, my favorite choice for Bad Company album is this one, Dangerous Age. The second of the Brian, little switcheroo there, the second of the Brian Howe era. Now, what goes on here is, and you talked about this actually in one of your History in 5 Songs podcasts, your episode that you called The Foreigner Effect. So Brian Howe sounds nothing like Paul Rogers. He sounds a lot more like Lou Gramm. He's got a very, very high, naturally high voice, and it doesn't sound like it hurt him to sing in those higher keys. So naturally, they ended up writing a different sounding songs. Also, we're well into the 80s now. So the first album that they did with Brian, let me get it out here. This one here. This is a very poor album. This was produced by Mick Jones, or at least he is produced by Keith Olsen. Mick Jones is an executive producer. I think he figures in on the songwriting. And this could very well be, if you swapped out Brian Howe's voice and put in Lou Gramm, this would fit perfectly right in between Agent Provocateur and Inside Information. It's very keyboardy, doesn't sound like Bad Company at all, except maybe the first song, Burning Up. That's a little bit more guitar driven. So I think that they were going to try that route to sort of wind their way back into the public consciousness, because, when your last album was 82, that's a lifetime. That's a lifetime for, they were never a video band or anything like that. So that didn't work. That sort of, rock, adult contemporary sound that Foreigner was doing very well with at the time wasn't working for Bad Company. The album didn't certify, it fell right off the charts. So then I think what they did was, these hair metal bands, they're sort of, they're doing quite well. Some of them cite us as an influence. Maybe we'll take a little page from that. And you've got a vocalist in Brian Howe who lends himself to that style of music. Paul Rogers does not. Paul Rogers, great vocalist, of course, but Brian Howe just has more of that high tenor going above the rest of the band. So they were always very simple in their songwriting and arrangements. There's nothing new under the sun there, and there's nothing new under the sun lyrically either. But they put this album out, and this album is sort of I don't know what you'd call it, like a stealth hair metal album. They didn't look like a hair metal band. By now they're just kind of like hiring out bass players. But they sort of mined a similar sound to, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example of a band that was just doing that straightforward. Maybe Tesla comes to mind, a band that was just doing very, very simple hard rock. I mean, these chords are literally, a lot of them, they just rely on, if you're a guitar player just playing an open E and then doing a G, pull up that, like they just kind of, variants on that. There's a little better, shows up a little better picture of what the band looked like. And this album cover, I always thought, is this the grown-up, a little older version of the kid on the 1984 record? Yeah. So they're still on Atlantic Records at this point. And honestly, so this is 1988, fall of 1988. I'm kind of just basically getting into all things music and older music. I had heard of the band Bad Company, but I hadn't heard one song by them. I honestly hadn't heard one song by them. The first thing I ever heard from Bad Company was when I saw the video to No Smoke Without a Fire, which was the first video, first single from Dangerous Age. And my first thought was it kind of reminded me of Def Leppard. It had the sort of the chanty background vocals, and the radio also played the song Shake It Up a little bit too. That kind of made a dent in the charts. And those are both really good songs, I thought, and sort of definitely a reinvention of Bad Company, to the point where it's sort of like the Van Halen thing, where not that I hadn't heard the Dave stuff, but when I started listening actively to new music coming out, it was the Hagar era. So the Brian Howe era is kind of my era of Bad Company, and that's nothing to take away from the Paul Rodgers era, certainly. But as you already alluded to, people know Bad Company for those big hits, for those classic rock radio staples. With the possible exception of, I'd say, the first album, or maybe Desolation Angels, which I do quite like. Man, those albums are spotty. They get really, I hate to use the word boring, but I'm going to use it. They get really boring really fast. I mean, there's only so many ways that you can just take these blues themes and present them, especially if you're going to slow down and have like a piano song. And as great a vocalist as Paul Rodgers is, after a while, you can't tell where one song ends and the other begins. And they're sort of punctuated with these flashes of brilliance that kind of raise the pulse a little bit. And really, I think that's the case through most of those 70s albums. Although I will say that I've been listening to a lot of Bad Company leading up to this. The Burning Sky album is actually better than I remembered it. And a lot of that is because on this live album I mentioned, they actually do a lot of it live, which by its nature brings it to life a little bit more. But songs like the title song and Too Bad and Heartbeat, those kind of went up in my estimation. Rough Diamonds is that's a really bad album. I mean, that's not even boring. That's just outwardly bad, in my opinion. Once you get past Electric Land, it's just very strange that the use of like Downhill Rider with those keyboards on there. Very strange choice. And I don't even, sometimes I wonder why they even bothered putting out that last album. It didn't, for a band to go from all of these certifications to an album that doesn't even certify it and no hits, man, they totally fizzled out. Brian Howe gave them a shot in the arm and gave them the career comeback. And it's interesting because nowadays, you talk to Mick Ralphs or Simon Kirk, and they are completely dismissive of this era, like totally dismissive of this era. A lot of the songwriting was done by Brian Howe and the producer Terry Thomas, who produced, I think he produced like Dangerous Age, Holy Water, and Here Comes Trouble. All three of those albums have a similar sound. I think this one is the best one all the way through. Really, none of the Bad Company albums sustain interest from start to finish that well, especially Holy Water, which is a good album, but there's too many songs on it. It's got like 13 songs on it, and you just lose interest after a while. Yeah. This album is probably the best one for just upbeat rock songs all the way through. Not a lot of variation in them. Keith Olsen, the late Keith Olsen would say what he said about Whitesnake Slip of the Tongue. He's like, can you write in any other keys besides A? There's a lot of sameness sounding going across these. But Brian's was such a great singer. We sadly lost him last year. That he carries a lot of these songs, even if he's singing about absolutely nothing. And, the riffs are so simple. He carries these songs and makes you sort of get behind it and believe it. And it worked. Like I said, Dangerous Age went gold. Very kind of stealthily went gold, very quietly. And then Holy Water comes out. They had a power ballad hit, If You Needed Somebody, which went all the way to 16 on Billboard. Not bad for a bunch of old guys. And they sort of held their own in the power ballad years. And they oddly enough, they toured that year with Damn Yankees, who were basically doing the very, very same thing, except under a new name, right? So very stealthily, they kind of had a second career highlight. Of course, like I said, Simon and Mick are totally dismissive of that era. And that kind of irks me a little bit because they brought that name back. Like with Brian Howe, those albums brought them back out of complete and total obscurity. And I don't even know if they would have done well when Paul Rodgers eventually returned, if they hadn't had, like, the name was still on people's minds. And I think Dangerous Age, I know a lot of people that didn't necessarily have a lot of 70s rock albums or albums by 70s rock bands that were into the late 80s stuff, had this on cassette. Actually, I'll show you the cassette here, right here. They had this because, have you heard this? This is pretty good. Like, it was just one of those, it was like a sleeper hit, right? and Holy Water basically did the same thing. By the time Here Comes Trouble out, like I said, they managed a gold album that still hit the delete bins because obviously it didn't sell as well, and that was pretty much it for their commercial. That comeback was pretty much over, but they did quite well. And again, I just think that there's One Night, that was another rock radio hit. Bad Man's a good song. The CD actually has a bonus song called Excited, which is actually one of the more exciting tracks on it. It's got a higher tempo. It's not on the record or the cassette, but I just find this an enjoyable rock album to throw on and just not think about things, just have it playing in the background. Whereas even those classic Bad Company albums, man, once you get past the obvious songs, the rest of them, they just kind of sit there, and it's almost like the band is, let's see how simple we can get, but they get too simple. And I know that's sacrilege, and I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, like, how dare you? And it's nothing against, that's a great lineup, very, great bunch of players, but they never concentrated all of that talent into one really solid, chock full album of great songs. And another reason I kind of want to stick it to that original era is something that I read, and this, how you read things that just kind of irks you the wrong way, and like, when you hear like Joe Elliott talking about Def Leppard never wanting to be a metal band and the same old thing. Well, last year when Brian Howe passed away, whoever does Paul Rogers' Twitter account, it's his official account, but I doubt it's him sitting there. But there's a tweet that came out that says something to the effect of, people have been asking about my health and such of late, and I assure you I'm quite all right. And I remember reading that thinking, that's not very classy, Paul. You know damn well why people are asking. All they read was Bad Company vocalist dies. That's all they read. Yeah. And they thought it was you. Like, I'm sure they weren't best buddies. They may have never even met, but at least you could have said something about, condolences to family and all that stuff. That just kind of made me think, man, I thought that was not really classy. Has nothing to do with the music. But what I did, of course, when Brian died, I went back and I listened to a bunch of these albums. I said, these are pretty good. But this has always been my favorite. It remains my favorite. And listening to the catalog as a whole, I still think it's the most consistent Bad Company album from start to finish. So I'm sure there's a million reasons why I'm wrong. Martin, let's get started with them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're in or you're out to all this crazy talk is you stated it very eloquently. Bad Company really annoys a lot of people with that simplicity of that early catalog, and there is a real, like, they're almost daring you to call them boring, right? So there's definitely a lot of holes and patchiness. It's a little bit like when I did the math of that episode where I said Perfect Strangers is my favorite Deep Purple album. It's because I find a lot of flaws on each album moving through the catalog. So that really does make a good point. They're not particularly long either. And yeah, Simon as a drummer, I mean, I don't know. It's just so incredibly simple. And this is why I get into trouble when I diss Free. I mean, I try so hard to like Free. I'm supposed to like Free, don't like Free very much, right? Because it's even a simpler version of Bad Company.
Well, yeah, same. You think they're like a beta version of Bad Company, but once you get past All Right Now and Fire and Water, it's even more slow and
exactly.
It's like you said, daring you, but it's almost like this elitist thing, like, how dare you diss the Fire and Water album, or like, I just did.
Yeah, exactly.
So they did get something right with Bad Company. They injected a little bit more bit more excitement into it, just a little
texture,
bit.
arrangement, a little bit, variety. I one thing I really like about that whole classic catalog is I remember making a mixtape where I lined up all the mellow songs in a row off of those 70s albums, and that was really cool. So a lot of cool mellow stuff. But I wanted to mention, Marco had asked some of our Wise Music Swami Patreon subscribers, and I got a few comments. Ryan said, for me, it was between, so this is about the ranking of the Bad Company albums. For me, it was between Bad Company and Straight Shooter. I chose Straight Shooter because it was my first exposure to the band, and I find it to be a very consistent album. album. Even the mellow tracks like Anna are great. Joe Beck says, well, he went and quoted Shooting Star, so I imagine he likes Shooting Star the best. Don the Chaldean says, I chose Run with the Pack. Very tough decision. Title track, Silver, Blue, and Gold, Honey Child, Live for the Music, Simple Manner, my favorite tracks in order. Yeah, those are all great. The strength of the first two push this album slightly above the debut and Straight Shooter, which are also excellent. I even love Desolation Angels for a couple of unsung gems like Evil Wind, yeah, Early in the Morning, definitely those two. Yes, the first two albums get most of the airplay and are packed with wonderful hits, but I'm sticking with Run with the Pack. Grant Arthur says, well, the first album is considered the best Bad Company album, but I prefer Desolation Angels myself. I probably do too. Love the songs and production, a contrarian choice for sure. And so Marco says, sum it all up, he got a lot of votes from the Patreon subscribers, and it came in as Bad Company and Straight Shooter. Return of Rock had them ranked as Bad Company 74 first, Straight Shooter 75 second, Run with the Pack 76. Are you seeing a trend here? Desolation Angels, then Burning Sky, then Holy Water, then Rough Diamonds. Dangerous Age was came in 8th. And I don't think they went and did the others, but they said it was the very best of the three Brian Howe. So curiously, they're kind of agreeing with you there. Classic Rock History and Rate Your Music wouldn't even rate these ones. I mean, they basically said, we're only going to look at the Paul Rogers catalog. So that definitely tells you something. Best Ever Albums had same kind of thing where it's Bad Company, the debut. Straight Shooter, Run with the Pack, Burning Sky. It's pretty much always like that. They had Here Comes Trouble pretty high, higher than Desolation Angels, Holy Water, Company of Strangers, 9. They had Dangerous Age way down the bottom. Ranker had pretty much the same thing. Dangerous Age, yeah, came in 9. 10 was Company of Strangers, 11 Fame and Fortune. Nobody's really liking these. I went and played it again, and I really the production just. I hate it, right? I hate the production. I hate that big, boring, simple, but wet drum sound. And a lot of things you said, it's quite humorous listening to you review the album because you don't say a lot of really super nice things about it. I mean, it's also like the simplicity went forward. There's not much to the lyrics. It's all like just open this and, just the keys. So it's funny. It's almost like all of us Bad Company fans have just this sort of ambivalence about them. Like we're not really sure, like I said, at the beginning, this is really a band with these massive anthemic hit singles and not much else. But yeah, you're right about this era. It's really wild where you look at the certifications and they certified so high and they did so well during that era, but it really was, you used the perfect word, stealth. I remember, in all the clang and celebration and mania of hair metal, these things just kind of like cruised under the radar. There wasn't a lot of press on them. There wasn't a lot of talk about them. You showed beautifully that the picture of the band. I mean, it looks like friggin' Emerson, Lake and Powell almost, right? It's just a bunch of old guys. It looks like Asia, right?
Yeah. Or Foreigner from that same era.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's see. Rate Your Music said out of this is them actually talking about Dangerous Age. A few of the comments there. Out of all the Bad Company's generic and formulaic 80s AOR albums, this one is probably the best. It has the most personality to it out of the albums. It still remains. It retains some of the bluesy nature that marked the band's sound in the 70s. Still, I felt so bored by the time I finished getting through it. Hardly any moment stood out in a good way. Brian Howe has great pipes, but they can't save this album from being mind-numbing. And mind-numbing's a little pretty good description as far as I'm concerned. The guitarist Mick Ralphs definitely does more for this album than anyone else, with his work really salvaging songs like Shake It Up, which is brought to life by the bluesy guitar licks that he inserts into the song, and One Night and No Smoke Without Fire, which have nice and heavy yet simultaneously catchy riffs running through the choruses, supported heavily by solid bass lines from Steve Price. Lyrically, this album veers into shameful territory. The lyrics are either generic or they play into some of the worst 80s hard rock cliches. The worst offenders are Dangerous Age and Dirty Boy. The former is a song about a 16-year-old girl who is lyrically sexualized to an extremely uncomfortable degree. The latter is one of the most uncomfortable, poorly written songs out there about a schoolboy crush on a teacher. The bluesy riffs and excellent vocal performance in Dirty Boy can't stop me from cringing at the words the whole time. Let's see. Easily my favorite, Paul Rogers, less Bad Company LP. So there's another vote for this being the better one of that bunch. Howe does a good job on vocals here. Definitely better than the last Rogers era LP, Rough Diamond, that's for sure. Good energy overall. The vocals are very strong through the though the music seems to start sounding the same towards the middle. Still a pretty decent album. This album could have been a lot worse. There are some catchy toe tappers, but the old Bad Company vibe is long gone. There's not much in the way of blues rock here, but there are some acceptable hard rock tracks. I looked at live songs throughout set list throughout the years. Granted, this is later and it's always at a disadvantage for that, but No Smoke Without Fire came out as the 26th most played Bad Company song of all time. Shake It Up, 27th. One Night, 29th. Rock of America, 70. And past here, you get down into like occasional covers pretty much. But Dangerous Age, 83. Bad Man, 100. So yeah, it wasn't played a lot live, and wow, this is one of the episodes where we really have a contrarian choice, and it's really proven by the ranking when people, like I say, I thought one of the funniest things is people would rank this catalog and they just get a headache. Even I don't even want to go listen to the Brian Howe albums. I'm only going to rank the Paul Rogers albums, which is pretty funny. But
but what I'm saying is listen to them all, and none of them are killer from, in my opinion, from start to finish. Lyrically, yeah, there are some really bad 80s tropes, and that continues on Holy Water, Boys Cry Tough or whatever that's called. Like, I don't know where lyrically it's not great. But, Paul Rogers essentially wrote two sets of lyrics, which is basically one more set of lyrics than David Coverdale wrote, like one master set of lyrics that they just cut and paste from. Paul Rogers wrote a love song, and he wrote like an outlaw song.
Yeah.
That whole cowboy outlaw, that raises its head a lot of the Paul Rogers stuff, which at least elevates it a little bit. With the Bad Company stuff with Brian Howe, it's true. The more you listen to it, and I have to go back to it in doses, because it's essentially, it's like you didn't have. It reminds me of the story with the first Rush album, how John Rutsey tore up the lyrics and Geddy had to just write lyrics on the fly. That's what this sounds like to me.
Yeah.
They rhyme, he sings them so well.
Yeah.
And they've got a chorus put together, but getting up there, it's like, just don't pay any attention to the lyrics.
Yeah.
This band was never a band of lyrical geniuses. They could have really done with, like a Pai Dubois or somebody like that. Yeah. Putting those little turns of phrase that people remember. Really, honestly, Paul Rogers is probably the better lyricist, but the original Bad Company, they would get bogged down in this need to slow the tempo down and just no variation. And with the Brian Howe stuff, there's not a lot of variation, but at least it's in an upper tempo thing. So, Bad Company is a band that I would never rank as one of my favorites. They're a likable band. I like the band. And they're, it's almost one of those cases where maybe a good, well-picked compilation is enough. But the trouble is that I really do like the Brian Howe era. And it's a little bit like the Hagar era. There's no remasters. There's no one pays any attention to it. No one's going to, if the band themselves disregard it, the only copies you're ever going to find are the used copies that came out originally. There's never going to be a compilation of the Mark II Bad Company, as it were.
Yeah.
The other thing I find interesting, and I think that a lot of the rankings do pick this up, probably their two worst albums are the last Paul Rogers and the first Brian Howe. I don't know of anybody that would say Rough Diamonds or Fame and Fortune are great albums. So this was such an immense improvement over Fame and Fortune, but it's not as if people were comparing it because nobody heard Fame and Fortune, right? I stand by this album as being, if I want to listen to a Bad Company album, that's not a compilation. This is the one that I would reach for.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, this band, they almost pride themselves on that idea of, you can almost picture them doing the songs, recording them, and then literally taking parts out of them because they're priding themselves on simplicity, a little bit like early AC/DC, well, all of AC/DC, I suppose, but you really feel it on High Voltage more than any our North American version of High Voltage or TNT. You really feel it on there. And then this thing, that whole Foreigner effect thing. Foreigner was a little bit like that as well, where you're holding back on the performances to let the song come through and breathe. And it's almost like they're priding themselves on that. And then when you get to the Brian Howe era, there's a little bit more of a work ethic and we have to compete with everybody else ethic that there's more stuff thrown in, and obviously the albums are longer and that sort of thing. And yeah, it's a great voice too. So anyways, let us know what you guys think about all this. Obviously, this has been somewhat of a shocking episode, but let us know in the comments below. And again, we do a lot of different Patreon stuff. Marco's really good at putting together symposiums and panels, and we actually end up posting a lot of those shows on YouTube. So we do have a cool Patreon thing, and yeah, this is really cool. And thanks again, Tim, for coming here and being in the really hot seat on this one, because this one will go down as one of the episodes with a truly contrarian choice. But there you go. But I really like that. Some of this music that more or less gets ignored, we get a good, thoughtful, intelligent relook with a lot of detail, which we just did from Tim, and you can go back and reassess these albums because they sold a lot of companies. So for Tim and myself, there you go. Go listen to some Bad Company.
That's it, dude.